In the early 1970s, a young American linguist named Daniel Everett arrived in the Amazon rainforest to live with a small tribe called the Pirahã. He had come as a missionary intending to translate the Bible into their language. He would spend the next 3 decades there instead, learning something that would eventually overturn his faith, end his marriage, and divide the field of linguistics in ways that have not been resolved since. The thing he learned was this: the Pirahã do not tell stories about things that did not happen. They do not talk about things they have not personally witnessed, or that someone they directly know has not personally witnessed and told them about. When Everett tried to tell them about Jesus, about events that happened 2,000 years ago in a land on the other side of the world, the Pirahã were not skeptical. They were confused. Why would anyone talk about something no one present had seen? The concept of relating information about events outside direct personal experience was not morally objectionable to them. It was cognitively strange, like being asked to describe the color of a sound. Everett had arrived expecting to teach them about truth. He found a people who had organized their entire relationship with language around a principle he had never encountered before. Only say what you know, and know only what you can verify. The first instinct, when you encounter this, is to romanticize it. A society without lies. A people who tell only the truth, not because they were morally trained to, but because their entire linguistic and cognitive framework simply does not contain the architecture for deliberate falsification. This reading is appealing, and it is probably wrong, or at least incomplete, because the question of whether the Pirahã are more honest than the rest of us depends entirely on what you mean by honesty, and that question turns out to be considerably more complicated than it first appears. The Pirahã are not more honest in the way a saint is more honest. They may be operating with a different cognitive toolkit, one that simply does not include certain operations that the rest of us perform so automatically that we do not think of them as operations at all. To understand what those operations are, you need to understand what lying actually requires. Lying is not simply saying something false. Saying something false by accident is a mistake, not a lie. Lying requires the ability to hold 2 separate representations of reality in your mind simultaneously. The way the world actually is, and the version of it that you are presenting to someone else, knowing it differs from the first version and intending the listener to believe the false version. This is called second-order intentionality, and it is a specific cognitive capacity that developmental psychologists can measure, test, and track as it emerges in children. Children under about 3.5 years old cannot lie effectively, not because they have not been morally instructed yet, but because the cognitive architecture required for deliberate deception is not yet in place. They can say false things, but they cannot strategically manage another person's beliefs by saying them. The ability to lie is the ability to model another mind and manipulate what that mind believes. It requires a theory of mind, the understanding that other people have mental states, beliefs, and knowledge that differ from your own, and that those states can be influenced by what you say. This capacity does not come for free. It is one of the most cognitively demanding things the human brain does. The evolutionary hypothesis that explains why this capacity developed at all is called the Machiavellian intelligence hypothesis, proposed by primatologists Andrew Whiten and Richard Byrne in 1988. The argument is that the primary driver of primate brain size was not the need to process the physical environment, but the need to navigate complex social environments. Social living creates a specific set of cognitive problems that have no parallel in non-social existence. You need to track who is allied with whom, who owes what to whom, who is likely to defect under what conditions, and crucially, who is telling you the truth and who is managing your beliefs for their own benefit. The same cognitive machinery that allows you to detect when someone is lying to you also allows you to lie to them. Theory of mind is a dual-use technology. It is the foundation of both social intelligence and social deception, and the hypothesis proposes that these capacities co-evolved in a kind of cognitive arms race, with the ability to deceive and the ability to detect deception driving each other to increasing sophistication across millions of years of primate social evolution. The brain you are using right now is, in part, the product of that arms race. The part of you that knows when someone is not being straight with you is the same part that allows you to be not straight with someone else. Which brings us back to the Pirahã, and to a question that Everett himself has grappled with for decades. If the Pirahã's linguistic principle of immediacy, the rule that you only speak of what you or someone you know has directly experienced, effectively eliminates the social context in which elaborate deception would be motivated, does that mean they cannot deceive, or simply that they have organized their society in a way that makes large-scale deception unnecessary? The distinction matters enormously. A society where people do not lie because the social conditions that make lying advantageous have been removed is a very different thing from a society where people lack the cognitive capacity for deception. Everett's own position has evolved over the years. He does not claim the Pirahã cannot deceive. He claims their cultural constraints around language create a social environment in which the kind of elaborate narrative deception that characterizes much of human social life simply does not arise. They are not incapable of lying. They are living in a social structure that has minimized the occasions for it. The Ahung San of the Kalahari offer a different angle on the same question. Studied extensively by anthropologist Richard Lee in the 1960s and 1970s, the Kung San have an elaborate system of social norms around sharing and resource distribution that functions effectively as a structural constraint against a specific type of deception. When a hunter makes a kill, the meat is distributed according to strict social rules that leave almost no room for hoarding or misrepresentation. Lee documented a practice called insulting the meat, in which hunters returning with a successful kill are met with deliberate undervaluation of their achievement by other community members. A large kill is described as small. An impressive animal is dismissed as barely worth eating. This is not cruelty. It is a social technology specifically designed to prevent the successful hunter from developing an inflated sense of entitlement, from beginning to think that his contribution makes him more important than others, from accumulating the kind of social capital that could be used to leverage advantage over fellow group members. The Kung San did not eliminate deception by making people more virtuous. They built a social structure in which the conditions that motivate the most socially destructive forms of deception were systematically undermined. The incentive was removed. And when the incentive is removed, the behavior largely disappears. Not because the cognitive capacity is gone, but because the motivation to use it is. Here is the thing about lying that most people have never been told. It is harder than telling the truth. Not morally harder, cognitively harder. When you tell the truth, you are reporting what your mental model of reality contains. When you lie, you are doing something considerably more complex. You are maintaining your actual model of reality, constructing an alternative model to present to the listener, tracking the difference between them, managing what information the listener has access to, so the alternative model remains consistent, and monitoring the listener's response to adjust your presentation in real time. Studies measuring cognitive load during deception consistently find that lying requires significantly more mental resources than truth-telling. fMRI studies show broader and more intense activation across multiple brain regions during deliberate deception than during honest reporting. Children with certain cognitive impairments that reduce working memory capacity are less capable of effective lying, precisely because the working memory demands of deception exceed what their systems can support. Lying is a feat of cognitive engineering. Doing it well requires a functioning and sophisticated social brain. The capacity to deceive is not a sign of moral corruption. It is a marker of cognitive complexity, which leaves you with a conclusion that should sit uncomfortably for a moment before it starts to make sense. A society that has genuinely eliminated deception, not through virtue but through structural constraint or cognitive simplicity, may have eliminated something that is inextricably connected to the capacities we most value about human minds. The imagination required to construct a false narrative is the same imagination required to construct a fictional story, a scientific hypothesis, or a plan for the future. Theory of mind. The capacity to model other people's mental states that makes deception possible is also the capacity that underlies empathy, the ability to understand what someone else is experiencing from the inside. The Machiavellian brain that evolved to deceive and detect deception also evolved to cooperate, to coordinate, to care about what others think and feel and believe. You cannot neatly remove the deception capacity from the rest of it. It is woven into the same cognitive fabric. Everett went to the Amazon to teach the Pirahã about a world beyond what they could see. He found people who had decided, in one of the most fundamental ways possible, not to. Neither of them was wrong exactly, but only one of them could have written a book about it, and only one of them would have wanted to.